It is nice to have the newest toy on the street. I'd lie to tell you otherwise. It's big and shiny and bright and works really well, and, well, I just got a whale of a big kick out of it.
First Boeing 777s operated by United were running 99% dispatch reliability, which is just unheard of.
This airplane's smart enough to tell you if you have a light bulb burned out and a no smoking sign in the back. It'll tell you what seat and what row.
We were making this paradigm shift to go 100% digital on the 77 program. We wanted to make sure it was going to work.
I think for the ride it would be a Rolls Royce with perhaps a performance maybe of a Porsche.
This is the world's newest and most sophisticated jetliner, the Boeing 777. Even though this airship looks pretty much like all others, in many ways it represents a monumental shift in the way airplanes are designed and built. Hoping that this plane will come to dominate the next several decades, Boeing has dubbed it the 21st Century Airliner. For now, the 777 is a plane only the Top Guns fly. At American Airlines, Captains James Galt and Paul Hinton have 70 years of experience between them. Both flew in the Vietnam War, and they're charged with showing Americans' other pilots how this new bird flies.
My romance in flying actually began when I entered the Air Force back in 1963.
On my very first ride in the Air Force, the instructor took me up and turned me upside down in the airplane, and we did a loop. And at the conclusion of the loop, I said, I think I'd like to try this again.
Today, pilots Galt and Hinton will fly American Airlines Flight 78 from Dallas-Fort Worth to London. At the gate, 300 passengers wait to board.
Heard that this particular plane is supposed to be more spacious and will take that flight much quicker than what it normally would.
When I requested, it's for a business trip, I requested my company to book a 777.
As state-of-the-art, fuel efficient, carries more passengers, greater comfort in the coach, business, and first class.
Hi, Jim Gold. Nice to meet you.
Though seemingly a maze of instruments, panels, and controls, the 777's cockpit is more efficient and less complicated than that of its predecessor, the Boeing 767.
Indicator lights.
You get the proper light enunciation throughout the cockpit, and then I'll refer to the checklist and see what I missed. That looks good, that looks good.
I started out in aviation, we had to do a blindfold cockpit check. We would have to sit in the cockpit with a blindfold around us while an instructor would say, put your hand on the altimeter, put your hand on the throttle.
Check-in is still hands-on for Captain Galt, but truly the 777 can fly itself. In fact, the throttle and stick are not connected by cable directly to the tail and wings, but to a computer, which in turn electronically forwards the pilot's directions to the mechanical parts.
Okay. We pretty well got this thing set up now. We can go downstairs and do our walk-around.
Though the maintenance chief has signed off, Captain Galt makes his own walk-around inspection. It's a throwback to the pioneering days of aviation, when a little bit of leaking oil or water meant the plane might not get off the ground.
Just looking at the engine, making sure there's no runs, no drips, no errors when we look at the motor.
Got 3 signatures on it, today's date, good to go. All right, thank you kindly, appreciate it.
This $100 million flying machine has 3 million parts, all of which must work in perfect harmony. The 777's wings have an area of 570 square yards and span 200 feet, 40 feet longer than the Wright brothers' first flight.
Okay, what we're looking at in here now, we've got 6 wheels. We want to check the conditions of the tires. We want to make sure that we have enough brake wear. They go from being stationary to 150 miles per hour in the blink of an eye. Here's an example of a touchdown on the tire tread. You can see a little bit of a scuff. That's where this particular wheel touched the runway. You can see they're pretty tough, and they don't do a great deal of damage to the tires at all under normal circumstances.
While Jim looks at the outside, the Central Maintenance Function, or CMF, is examining the inside. This powerful onboard computer checks virtually every system, flagging any problem almost as it occurs.
I love it. I'm a big Star Trek fan, so It's as close as I can get right now. But this airplane tells us everything we need to know. This airplane's smart enough to tell you if you have a light bulb burned out and a no smoking sign in the back.
The brain of the 777 is located under the flight deck. It is called the Aircraft Information Management System, or AIMS. One central box, actually two, either of which can fly the plane in case the other is somehow damaged, has the ability to control flight, cockpit displays, monitor plane and engine functioning, and a host of other tasks. But as sophisticated as the 777's AIMS system is, on this airplane, the pilot remains in charge.
I can't accept that because that's not what I want, so I reject it. I take the CG off, I put that in there, and I check the speed. I do it myself.
Blind faith in computers can lull a pilot into complacency. It's one of the lessons Hinton and Galt are trying to pass on to the younger pilots. At the core of Paul's concern is safety. The 777 is not the first jet to run on a computerized master system. The Airbus, made by the British and French, originally had a computer system that had the final say on what the aircraft could or could not do. However, an airshow demonstration quickly revealed a fatal flaw. As the test pilot made a low pass, the computer locked up his controls.
Oh yeah!
So Boeing says we can't build a computer that will cover all eventualities, and therefore we have to let the pilot get into the airplane and fly.
We're flying once again with Paul Hinton, Jim Galt, and Doug Josfo. Our flying time today will be 8 hours and 43 minutes at an altitude of 37,000 feet.
Chief Purser Patricia Grace, a 30-year veteran of American Airlines, is conducting her pre-flight briefing for the 14 flight attendants working this trip.
Number 12, Himania. Number 3, Faye, you will be doing the directing at the forward entry door. And one parting word for our briefing today, keep in mind that a great attitude always precedes a great performance. Let's have a great day.
Getting ready for 300 guests is a mad scramble. To make money, all passenger planes must fly as often as possible. The turnarounds from one international flight to another can be as little as 1 hour. It takes an army of 40 people to get the 777 ready for today's transoceanic flight. The 777's soaring wings hold 44,000 gallons of jet fuel. Since the 777 is made of lightweight composites and alloys, it is 1/3 more fuel efficient than the 747, but has the same range, 8,400 miles, or the distance from Florida to Hong Kong. Because of its circular shape, the 777 has enormous below-deck cargo capability, which is even more than a 747 in terms of weight. Semicircular containers slide in with only millimeters to spare. Normally, the plane transports about 30 tons of freight, or the equivalent of 15 automobiles.
Everything has a weight. Everything has to be accounted for. If it doesn't make it, they need to know why it doesn't make it.
AIMS, the same computer that flies the 777, tracks freight coming on board. It monitors each container's weight, its contents, and position to ensure nothing is left behind and the plane is balanced.
First two being the front.
Catering trucks bring 300 full meals, 600 snacks, 500 drinks, and 500 bottles of liquor to supply the 3 galleys on board.
This one coming from somewhere? Tokyo. No, man. No. It came from Denver. What are you
Mark, could you get me a coat hanger?
A coat hanger?
A coat hanger.
For flight attendant Susan Hans, this trip will be her first on the 777.
Here, get it here. I'll put it behind.
Susan is a galley specialist, and she's getting the coach galley ready to serve 163 passengers, though she's never seen this setup before.
Do you have any idea where everything is?
Not yet, but I'll find it in short order.
The first-class galley will only serve 20 people, but also takes getting used to.
I have never done this before. This is terrible.
What happened?
The oven rack pulled completely out because it wasn't the same width as the oven. So, let me get the caterer back here.
You lost some shrimp scampi there.
I was going to put it together, actually. We have 13 VCR units that you see over here. This is called our PAT, our Primary Access Terminal Control Center. All of the programming from our videos is done from this particular PAT.
The 777's in-flight entertainment system has 250,000 lines of dedicated software code and is as sophisticated as the entire avionics systems of most commercial aircraft built in the 1980s.
4 start, sir. Let's look at it. I can do that. Window is open on the left. Oxygen panel's master. Check left. Check right. En route. Check. 164.5, I see. 164.5 set. 164.5 and set. There you go.
Propelled by 200,000 pounds of thrust, more than was used to send the first men into space, the Boeing 777 blasts into the sky, headed over the Atlantic. With 250 airships flying for 23 airlines and 180 on order, the 777 still qualifies as a brand new plane. But a brand new plane takes more than a decade to build. Boeing began work on this most modern airship in 1988. The 777 was an aircraft born out of necessity. In 1988, several airlines approached Boeing to build an airship which could economically take 300 passengers on short hops as well as intercontinental trips. Boeing's 200-passenger 767, introduced in 1981, has a range of 7,000 miles, while its 500-passenger 747, which debuted in 1968, has a range of 8,400. But the airlines needed an aircraft in the middle, a plane that could carry 300 passengers for either short or long distances, and they needed this plane to be fuel efficient. Boeing realized it needed to build a wholly new aircraft. To do this, Boeing's facility in Everett, Washington had to be dramatically expanded to provide for 2 777 production lines. 2 years and $1.5 billion later, the facility was ready. Some 275,000 cubic yards of concrete had been poured to form the floor, enough to make 44 miles of 4-lane freeway. The assembly plant also required 85,000 tons of steel, or twice the amount needed to erect the Empire State Building. An innovative part of the new complex was a $370 million laboratory in which every part of the new airship would be tested before the real 777 ever flew. Boeing implemented a program called Working Together. Design teams from United, All Nippon, British Airways, and other airlines took up residence in the Everett plant working alongside Boeing's personnel. In addition, consumers, mechanics, and pilots took part in the planning process from the beginning.
The important thing from the start was that they called in their customers, they called in the mechanics, they called in the flight attendants, they called in the pilots, and they said, let's make a plane that you want.
The first meeting, they turned to me and said, for flight guidance, do you want single queue or dual queue? Single queue is a sort of a top of a triangle shape, and the airplane flies into the top of the triangle. In double queue, you have 2 single needles. And I looked around and I thought, like Robert De Niro, are you talking to me? So I said, I'll have dual queue. And they wrote that down. I said, my God, that worked. Well, it was an amazing experience.
The people who work on airplanes, like the mechanics, cargo handlers, and flight attendants, were also canvassed for money-saving ideas.
And the cargo handler said, you know, if you guys could move that little doodad there, we could get in another 10 feet of space. In another example, mechanics went in and said, look, we cannot use this tool of this size we need in this small compartment to remove this part. Either make the compartment bigger or move the part.
The most innovative and bold step Boeing took was to use a newly developed design system called CATIA. Computer-aided three-dimensional interactive applications. Using this new technology, Boeing designed and built a jetliner digitally, without drawing boards or mock-ups. This had never been done before.
We were going from the old 2D drafting board kind of technology to a totally new way of designing and building airplanes.
CATIA allowed designers to move parts around in the computer as if they were real. Using this program, engineers could work with a part before it was made.
When you look at something in 3D, it's the way you really look at an object. And the other big advantage that we have with CATIA is that it gives us the ability to look at different parts and how they fit together. And if they don't fit together, it identifies interferences.
Parts that interfere with each other are one of the biggest problems facing airplane manufacturers.
And we had to actually create an internal software that gave us the ability to look at thousands of parts. So when we created this software, it gave us the ability to fly through the airplane, identify those parts that had an interference, and to fix them.
By creating a virtual hand, designers made sure that mechanics had room to reach every part requiring maintenance.
The system allows you very high accuracy, up to a thousandth of an inch accurate. And it's really important with an airplane because any vibration or so forth is not good.
Of course, even the most brilliant design tool is useless without skilled designers. The 777 sent Boeing on a literal hiring spree, unsurpassed in airline history. Boeing assembled the largest computer design team in history, over 10,000 people, each with a workstation. The use of this revolutionary virtual technology allowed the 777 to be designed by teams around the world, as far away as Australia and Japan. By going online with each other, virtual meetings could take place, streamlining the design process. Using CATIA virtual reality to fine-tune construction led to significant savings.
A good example would be the storage bins. It used to take up to 17 shifts to install all of the storage bins, and with CATIA we do it in 2.
The 777's overhead baggage compartments open lower and are deeper than any others in the sky.
It has an automatic assist, so that when you start, watch what I'm doing now, when you start pushing on it, see how it takes over, and the bin automatically closes itself.
2.5 hours en route, America's Flight 78 is over the Atlantic.
It's huge, it's spacious, it's got high ceilings, and it gives you a feeling like you're flying in your own living room.
The 777's fuselage is a foot narrower than the 747, but it feels roomier. This effect was achieved through the use of curved ceilings and near vertical walls. Leg rests in business class let passengers stretch out, but seats fold all the way down in first class, letting passengers go completely horizontal. And every seat in every class has its own TV screen. In the higher classes, the entertainment systems are more complex.
Well, it's hidden. I had to find it first. And actually you just push, it pops out. The screen articulates up. And you bring it into view, and you actually can bend it back and forth a little bit so you can watch TV in the middle of the evening and not bother your neighbor. And currently the screen is showing where the aircraft actually is. It has a GPS system, which is actually kind of interesting. We get to follow the path of the plane.
Flight attendants learned that slamming toilet seats could upset passengers, either by jolting them from sleep or sounding like a gunshot.
This is our no sound dropping toilet seat. I do this. Power assist takes over, similar to the overhead bins.
Air circulation and ventilation is better in the 777 than in earlier models. In fact, the 777 has apparently solved one of air travel's smelly little secrets.
One of the problems that we run across a lot of times is people with maybe gas. I can't believe I'm doing it. It becomes a problem because you pressurize. I mean, this aircraft is pressurized, and your body pressurizes also, and it is a problem that we all endure.
bit easier to endure on this plane now.
It is much better. It's a much kinder airplane to us. A giant leap for mankind.
For long hauls, the crew gets to be more comfortable than ever before. Behind the cockpit, pilots have a larger rest area, and in mid-cabin, so do the flight attendants.
Sometimes I feel it's too bad a passenger is denied the view we have through the front windows. One night we were flying and Venus was hanging like a little jewel from the top of the moon. It was so spectacular. Those are the things that stay in the memory bank forever.
America's Flight 78, Dallas-Fort Worth to London, is about 2 hours from its destination. Having turned their ship over to trainee pilot Doug Joshua, for the moment, pilots Hinton and Galt can relax. But the possibility of sudden danger is always present. Sometime in his or her career, every pilot is tested, as Jim Galt was when flying for an airline based in California a few years ago.
The unscheduled rollovers of 737s have made quite a bit of news lately. Well, I had one going into Reno. The airplane pitched up and rolled to the right, and I applied controls in the opposite direction, and the airplane continued to roll to the right. So in my mind, I was going to become a folk hero. I was going to roll the airplane until we could sort out why it was rolling. It finally responded to the pilot input to bring it back around to the left instead of continuing around to the right. And the airplane very slowly righted itself from about maybe, 110, 120 degrees of bank. It righted itself back to level again. That was a pretty exciting moment.
I was taking an airplane from Lodges to Kenley, Bermuda, and the anti-icing system quit on the airplane. And there was a moment when the navigator came up and said, well, if it keeps up this way, we're going in the drink an hour and a half short of Kenley. And we called up rescue crews, which couldn't find us. And we descended to try and get the ice off the airplane. It wouldn't leave. So we sat there for about 2 hours looking at an airplane that we did not think was going to make it to Bermuda. It ultimately did. And we didn't have a lot of gas left, but it did make it to Bermuda.
Flight 78 meets the sun. It's time for breakfast.
We'll do breakfast in about half an hour.
20 first class, 56 business, and 163 coach breakfasts must be prepared. Flight 78 flies on, powered by its 2 giant Rolls-Royce engines. Each of these gigantic power plants supply 92,000 pounds of thrust and are as big around as the fuselage of a Boeing 737.
This is a Rolls-Royce Trent engine. It's a 92,000-pound thrust engine that is one of the largest engine thrusts that are out today. The circumference of this engine is larger or as large as the 737 fuselage.
They actually produce more thrust than the Atlas rocket that first put the Mercury capsules into suborbit.
They just use 2 big engines on the airplane rather than 4 small ones. And although people may say 4 engines are better than 2, reliability studies have shown that as far as dispatch reliability goes and as far as in-flight turnarounds or diversions, 4 engines are less reliable because there's twice as much to go wrong.
To power the 777, Boeing and its engine suppliers, General Electric, Pratt & Whitney, and Rolls-Royce, built an engine unlike any before. Engine failures for the past 30 years were analyzed, and every historic weakness in jet engines addressed. At Pratt & Whitney, 22 engines were dedicated entirely to the testing process. Airliners encountered fierce storms, so 1.25-inch thick sheets of ice were fired into the huge turbines to duplicate the most severe ice storms imaginable. Ultra-slow-motion photography showed that the ice sheets pulverized as they hit the blades before reaching the engine. In another test, water simulating rainfall of 28 inches per hour, or a 1 in a billion storm, poured through the blades. Pratt & Whitney's engineers revved the turbine up to full throttle without any malfunction. 22 titanium blades suck in 2 million cubic feet of air during takeoff. But what if a blade tore loose in flight? Engineers detonated an explosive charge at the base of a blade to simulate such an event. With the force of a car hitting a wall at 80 miles per hour, the blade rips into the containment ring around the engine. It bulges out as the blade makes its round, but remains intact. Further tests showed that small rocks and general debris also pose no serious problem. But what about birds, which might slam into the blades while the plane is in flight? A flock of 8-pound dead birds were fired at 200 miles per hour directly into the whirling vortex. Each engine was run at top speed for 2,500 hours, the equivalent of 6,000 takeoffs and landings. The stringent program of testing yielded engines of extraordinary capability. Then the engineers tore them down and examined each part under microscopes for damage and any signs of wear.
And the airplane can fly successfully on the power produced by one engine, even in a takeoff scenario where it's full of fuel, full of passengers, and going from a fairly slow speed halfway down the runway, it still can continue the takeoff.
When we get the airplane and use it as we use it, we're not putting it anywhere near that sort of stress level. So the confidence level is extremely high.
We're 6:37 London time in the morning, and we're about a half an inch away from London.
8.5 hours after leaving Dallas, Flight 78 lands at Gatwick Airport, London.
100.
Doug Joshua makes a flawless landing. It's a credit to Jim and Paul's expert instruction, but ironically, it's one of the last times the captains will touch down in their $100 million baby. The time to hand the torch over to a new generation of pilots is fast approaching.
Super job. Super job. You do good work. And you're a pleasure to work with, too.
Likewise. We're going to miss you, old farts.
This year, Jim Galt and Paul Hinton turned 60, the Federal Aviation Administration mandatory retirement age for airline pilots. In fact, when the 777 returns to Dallas after an overnight, it will be Jim's retirement flight, his last as an airline pilot.
He's too young to retire.
But many feel the FAA's rule is outdated. Jim's son, Rob, also a pilot, is one of them.
I think that a pilot's physical ability to maintain his medical should determine when he or she should retire.
If physical ability, intelligence, and stamina are the criteria,
Guns.
just months ago, Jim Galt passed those tests with flying colors, and he engaged in a G-3 Force lung-crushing dogfight with his son Rob high over the Pacific Ocean. Who came out Top Gun?
Take it right straight up. Let it zoom a little bit, Jim. There he is.
To a former fighter pilot like Jim Galt, there's nothing more exhilarating than a dogfight. Rob brought the challenge to his dad as a Christmas present.
Fatal mistake. All right. Let him shut up and die like a man.
We engaged in 5 fights, and the score was 3-2. If he were telling the story, I'm sure he would say it was 3-2 in his favor.
The score was 3-2, and I'll let him finish it.
It was really 3-2 in my favor.
Bring some G on now. Take it straight up. Now put him in the canopy. Top of the canopy. Roll. Guns. Ladies and gentlemen, you saw it right there. We got the kill.
Jim's obviously got the right stuff. But nevertheless, the return to Dallas-Fort Worth will be his last flight for a U.S. carrier. The ups and downs of piloting are not reserved for takeoffs and landings.
It keeps you away from home all the time, a high percentage of the time. But a lot of time in hotel rooms and eating strange food, and it gets tiresome. Anybody who travels will tell you that it gets tiresome.
Like many pilots, long absences from home have led to divorces for both Paul and Jim.
It seems like any time something goes wrong, you are on the road. The pipe breaks, the dishwasher won't work, the washing machine overflows, the car won't start. And invariably you get the phone call in the hotel room. There's not much you can do about it.
Airline takeovers, mergers, and bankruptcies can put even an experienced pilot out of work.
I have been through 4 different airlines, 4 different probationary periods. Some very, very difficult times financially. At one point in my career, I was standing in line for food stamps. A little bit of fear, a little bit of anxiety perhaps, but I'm working with myself and trying to ready myself for the ultimate day when the final flight does occur, and I'm ready to move on to that next chapter. I will shed a tear, no doubt about it.
I think he won't face retirement well, but I don't think I will either.
4 starts, sir.
As the 777 rises from London, it encounters considerable turbulence, gale force winds over the Irish coast. While this shaking and buffeting upsets some passengers, Jim and Paul have no fear. They know their ship can fly through turbulence 100 times more powerful. Before a 777 ever left the ground, engineers subjected models to a wide variety of testing. Through the use of wind tunnels and other devices, they were able to subject every part of the plane to 20 years of wear in just a few hours. A full-scale prototype rolls from its hangar into the testing lab to begin a 2-year ordeal. In a cantilevered rig called the Iron Bird, the 777's fuselage, wing, and tail will be tortured to failure. That is, till they literally break apart. Skilled workers bond tension pads or strain gauges to the prototype's surfaces. There are 4,000 sensors inside the rudder alone. To connect the strain gauges to testing instruments requires 500 miles of cable. Under the scrutiny of Boeing and airline personnel, the testing program will last for 2.5 years. During the testing, the airplane is lifted off its landing gear on hydraulic jacks to simulate a plane in flight, totally free-floating. First, the fuselage and tail are shaken with the power equal to hurricane-force winds. Then, giant pistons apply 500,000 pounds of uplift to each wing, a destructive force equivalent to that experienced during a straight-down dive from 35,000 feet, fully loaded. At the same time, the Iron Bird structure exerts 1,000,000 pounds of force in the opposite direction, preventing the fuselage from rising. With such massive opposing forces, it is only a matter of time before something gives. At 10 feet above horizontal, the wings hold firm. At 15 feet, the wings still hold. 20 feet, 22, 23, 24 feet. Finally, at 24 feet above horizontal, the right wing fails. Then, 20 seconds later, the left. This was as predicted, and at the exact stress point, the 25th rib. After more than 2 years of torture, in 1993, the first plane for test flight goes into production. CATIA, the same computer system that ran the design, now oversees production. It fed construction data to the thousands of automated manufacturing machines building the new airliner. The rudders of the 777s were painted before the rest of the airframe, or even the weight of thin coats of paint must be accounted for in balancing the plane. The six-wheel undercarriage has been put through 40,000 simulated takeoffs and landings in the Iron Bird. Finally, the Pratt & Whitney engines specified for this plane are moved into position. Then, it's off to the paint shed. On April 9, 1994, the first Boeing 777 rolls off the assembly line, signaling a new era in aviation. Over the next 2 years, from 94 to 96, the 777 is flight tested. In all, 9 planes fly 4,900 flights, totaling 7,000 hours. At the same time, the airlines are bringing their pilots up to speed. In 777 cockpit simulators, like this one at American Airlines Dallas headquarters, pilots take the 777 anywhere in the world under any conditions. Instructors Hinton and Galt are responsible for creating dangerous scenarios for pilots in training. Here, in the safety of virtual space, a pilot can make mistakes or face dangers that are unlikely to come up in a lifetime of actual flying.
And I've set this one up so it fails in a very bad spot. It fails on the runway. That's the worst case scenario from our point of view. Rotate. Positive rate, gear up. You have to hold against the failed engine with rudder. I can depend on automatic systems to help me do my work.
Yeah, put it right up there.
The simulator is an eye-opening experience for pilots new to the 777. Their biggest surprise is how nimbly this large jet can fly.
And what you see is an airplane that can be flown through an incredible range of motion and still be perfectly flyable, and then we're out of it.
The 777's automated flight controls are designed to let pilots think about the big picture while the jet does the busy work.
Thank you.
But these flight controls are so sophisticated, some in aviation are beginning to envision the unthinkable: aircraft without pilots.
I'm going to demo what the airplane can do. I'm letting it fly it, as you can see.
500.
This airplane is the first airplane we've owned. With an engine failure, you could let it land itself.
Even after landing the 777, its flight controls continue to steer the plane down the runway's center line.
And it's still steering. It wants the center line very badly. Pilot and the dog. Absolutely. Do you know the joke? The joke is finally there will only be one pilot and he'll have a dog with him. And the pilot will be there to monitor the airplane and how it operates, and the dog will be there to bite the pilot if he touches anything. And I've always loved the joke. Somewhere downstream, we will come out of the equation. I think we will be there as a monitor. Somewhere downstream, our direct control over the flight path will disappear. When you look at the unmanned reconnaissance vehicles that more than one manufacturer making now, when you look at the control of the profile for the space shuttle, for instance, it is obvious we have the capability to do those things. Someone on the ground will be sitting there doing what I've done in flight for years. They'll say, oh, there's a problem with the air conditioning system, let me fix that. which they do from Houston now with the space equipment. It would be like blacksmithing. It would be one of those professions where we came into being at the turn of the last century and we'll disappear. And people will say to one another, do you remember when they used to have people in the front of these things?
At 37,000 feet, 7 hours out of London, the airliner is over the U.S.-Canadian border. Waiting in Dallas, Jim's son Rob is part of a special last flight reception. With Rob is Martha Jane Galt, Jim's 90-year-old mother.
Yes, she is. She's a little choked up.
I'm hurrying a bit because he loves it so and doesn't want to stop. And he's been flying that 777, and he's just been hogs heaven flying that. And I hate to take something away from somebody who loves it so dearly.
Alan, this is John Hotard with American Airlines regarding the retirement washdown.
Okay, thank you.
A pilot's retirement affects the entire aviation community. Alan Black, fire chief at the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, will send 2 fire trucks to spray their water jets on Jim's 777 when it lands. Around airports, this tradition is known as the shower of affection.
The tradition of doing aircraft washdowns for retirements and other specialty type of functions has been going on here ever since I first started here 18 years ago. It's sort of blossomed and taken on a life of its own because we have found as an organization that aircraft pilots, aviation executives, and even the passengers on airplanes really seem to enjoy it.
In a salute to Jim's career, the firemen will shoot 1,000 gallons of water in 30 seconds over the jumbo jet. To get the best view of the shower, the airport will also make a special gesture to Jim's mom and family. They will be allowed to stand on the tarmac just yards away as Jim's plane comes by. Just a few minutes away from his last 777 landing, Jim looks over his charts one more time.
I can see the airport. I can too. I don't see that sub either.
American Airlines currently has 11 777s in its fleet, but expects to increase that number to 39 by 2003. To fly that many planes, the airline will need to add 500 crew members, a teaching job which will keep Jim and Paul busy for many years. But they're not thinking about that right now.
100. 50, 40, 30, 20,
There they go. All right, cool.
Out of the grid.
Hey, nothing for the line. I didn't know we were there today.
Oh, look at it. Oh, there it goes. Oh, right.
Wow.
Pretty impressive.
Big plane.
Beautiful machine.
Someday, Rob.
We'll get over it.
Someday.
It's freeing up seniority slots for me.
It wasn't too terrible. It wasn't too bad. I got through that part. I almost lost.
Just a few weeks from now, Paul Hinton will follow his friend Jim Galt into retirement. And for both of them, the life they have known for so many years will end. But the honor of flying the Queen of the Fleet, the Boeing 777, has been a special gift. For these captains were 2 of the first to pilot the jet of the 21st century.
On a personal level for me, it was quite an honor and a privilege to be able to work on it. A culmination of a rather lengthy career that has had some curves and bends in it, but has certainly ended on a high note.
It is the ultimate toy. We have the shiniest thing on the street. Everywhere we take it, people get a big kick out of it. We took the airplane to San Juan, we took it to London, we took it to some of the major cities for American Airlines, and people line up in lines to look at it, and we love to talk about it, and they love to talk about it. It has been amazing. It's been amazing.
Stay with us as Discovery brings you a live news update on the ongoing Concorde investigation. Then from hijacking to deadly crashes, see how a record of the final moments before a disaster can help prevent future tragedies on Inside a Black Box.